The sun hung low over the plateau, bleeding gold into the dry desert air. Dust rose from the trails as horses kicked up the soil, and the distant mountains seemed to shimmer like a mirage. Natalia walked along the edge of the camp, her curly brown hair pulled into a loose braid that swung across her back, eyes the bright green of spring leaves, face pale with youth but hardened by the loss of her parents years ago. She had learned to move quietly, gracefully, and to observe everything, the movements of the elders, the moods of the warriors, the unspoken tensions that threaded through her people's daily life. She had never seen Kieran before. The rumors of him had preceded him, tall as a cedar tree, broad-shouldered and muscular, a jagged scar running from the edge of his jaw to his temple, a clean-shaven face that was stern, unreadable. He carried himself with a predator's confidence, and everyone in the camp gave him wide berth, murmuring the word savage under their breaths. And yet, Natalia could not tear her eyes away. He rode into camp in the late afternoon, the dust clinging to his leather clothing, the sun glinting off his dark hair. Even from a distance, she saw the way his eyes swept across the encampment like a hawk sizing up prey. There was something commanding in the way he sat tall in the saddle, and even the warriors who knew him whispered in awe, or fear. For her, curiosity overpowered caution. Natalia stepped closer, careful to remain unseen, to observe without inviting attention. She noticed the subtle details, the flex of his biceps as he adjusted the reins, the way his jaw tightened as he scanned the faces of the elders, the tension in the scar that ran across his cheek, like a permanent mark of a past battle no one wanted to ask about, and then their eyes met. It was a brief moment, but it left her breathless. Kieran's gaze was sharp, penetrating, the kind that made her heart beat faster and her limbs feel lighter at the same time. He was supposed to be fearsome, dangerous, and yet she felt curious, intrigued. Something about him spoke to a part of her she had never known, a part that longed for protection, but also craved challenge. The elders gathered in the center of the camp, speaking in hushed tones. Natalia remained near the edge, watching Kieran dismount with smooth precision, boots striking the dirt with authority. He did not bow to the elders. He did not offer the polite gestures of men trying to curry favor. He simply stood there, scarred jaw set, eyes scanning every movement, waiting to be addressed. "He has been sent by the Northern Band," one of the elders murmured, "to assist in defending our borders." Natalia could hear the undercurrent in their tone, the same fear that had traveled ahead of him. But she noticed how the younger warriors stiffened, how even seasoned hunters hesitated when Kieran passed, and how the women of the camp whispered behind their hands. She wanted to know what it felt like to be so powerful, so feared. She wanted to see if the stories told about him were true. And as he moved past her, brushing the braided edges of her hair with the edge of his sleeve by accident, she felt a thrill she could not name. Days passed, and Kieran proved to be as formidable as everyone had feared. His skills in the hunt were unmatched, his strategies in defense meticulous. But he spoke little, preferring to let his actions carry weight. Natalia watched him often, helping at the camp but keeping herself at a safe distance. He was a man of discipline and strength, and she was a woman of curiosity and will. Their worlds had brushed, and though they had not spoken, a quiet understanding began to grow. One evening, while the camp gathered for dinner, Natalia observed him from across the fire. His tall frame was silhouetted against the flames, muscles rippling as he adjusted the positioning of his spear. The scar across his face caught the firelight, emphasizing the sharp angles of his jaw. There was an intensity about him that made her pulse quicken. And though he did not glance her way, she imagined his eyes finding hers, imagined the connection that was waiting, patient and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. But she was not prey. She was curiosity, fire, and challenge. That night, Natalia lay awake in her tent, listening to the distant howl of coyotes and the crackling of the fire. Her mind replayed the brief brush of contact from the day, the way his presence had both unsettled and intrigued her. She knew she was not supposed to think of him in that way. He was dangerous, feared, almost untouchable. And yet she could not stop herself. Something about Kieran called to her, a siren song of strength, danger, and the unknown. Meanwhile, Kieran sat outside his own small shelter, the moonlight glinting on the scar along his cheek. He had noticed her, of course, every day, subtly in the way she moved, in the way she observed him. But he had been trained to resist distractions, to hold his attention to duty and survival. And yet, when she had brushed against him by accident, he felt something stir inside him that was unfamiliar. Something that made him pause, something that made him consider the possibility that not all threats were to be feared, and not all connections were weaknesses. The first spark of interaction came unexpectedly. Natalia had been collecting water from a nearby stream, her small basket balanced on her hip. Kieran appeared silently, almost as if he had emerged from the shadows themselves. He did not speak, only gestured toward the basket, offering his hand to help steady it. She hesitated, surprised at the gesture, but accepted it. Their hands touched briefly, warm, firm, grounding. Natalia felt a shiver run through her, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Kieran, for his part, felt the brief brush of her skin and pulled back slightly, though the movement was slow, controlled. Neither spoke, and yet something passed between them in that fleeting moment. A connection that was neither spoken nor understood, but undeniable. The rest of the day, both moved through their duties in a haze of thought. Natalia's eyes would occasionally wander to him, and Kieran's awareness of her presence lingered like a shadow. Neither would admit it, not yet, not aloud, but the slow burn had begun. Evening fell, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. The camp settled around the fire, sharing stories, preparing food, tending to children. Natalia found herself near Kieran once again, not by choice but by chance, or fate. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to narrow. He gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledging her presence without breaking the social order. It was enough. In the silence of the desert night, amidst whispers and crackling flames, Natalia understood something fundamental. Kieran was unlike anyone she had ever known. Feared by all, yet here, in the quiet of the camp, he had unknowingly invited her into his orbit. And she, despite every warning and every fear, wanted to step closer. The slow burn had begun, a fire that neither of them could yet name, a flame that would take weeks to ignite fully, but ignite it would, and the desert, the people, and the shadows themselves would bear witness. The desert was quieter now, cooler under the morning sun. Kieran had set up his small shelter just beyond the main camp, his movements deliberate and controlled. Every motion, untangling a horse's reins, sharpening a spear, stacking firewood, exuded the precision of a man trained in battle, a man accustomed to fear and respect. The scar along his jaw caught the first light of dawn, emphasizing the angular strength of his face. Natalia watched him from a distance, the braid of her brown hair swinging gently across her back as she carried a basket of herbs to the camp's healer. Her green eyes lingered on him despite her efforts to focus on her work. Each glance drew her closer to curiosity, and the fire that had begun in her chest the day he arrived now flickered into something stronger. She could not name it, could not speak it, but the pull toward him was undeniable. By mid-morning, Natalia found herself alone near the edge of the camp, arranging bundles of herbs. The sun glinted off the coppery threads of the desert sand, and the wind carried faint dust that clung to her skin. Kieran appeared silently, as if materializing from the shadows, his tall frame moving with the quiet grace of a predator. His eyes, dark and penetrating, scanned the horizon before settling on her. "You work quickly," he said, his voice low, controlled, almost a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the air. Natalia startled, dropping a small bundle of herbs. She scrambled to gather them, cheeks heating under his gaze. I want to help," she said softly. He raised an eyebrow, clean-shaven jaw tight, the scar prominent in the morning light. "You have courage," he replied, stepping closer. The heat of his presence was immediate. She felt it against her skin, sensed it pressing her forward even as instinct screamed caution. Their hands brushed once again as he extended a bundle of herbs to her. Neither moved away. Neither spoke further. The air hummed with something unspoken, a tension that stretched between them like a taut rope. Later that day, the camp gathered near the river to rinse clothing and fill water vessels. Natalia balanced a jug on her hip, moving carefully, and Kieran approached from behind, silent as a shadow. He carried his own water container, but did not immediately acknowledge her. Instead, he he offered to steady the jug as she struggled with the weight. Their hands touched, briefly, almost accidentally, but enough to send a shiver along her spine. She swallowed hard, aware of the muscles beneath his leather shirt, the broad shoulders, the height that towered over her own frame. Kieran felt the warmth of her hand, the slight tremor of anticipation, and for the first time, he allowed himself a long, lingering glance. The interaction was simple, mundane even, but the tension it carried was electric. Natalia's heart raced. Kieran's pulse thrummed beneath his skin, and though neither would speak of it aloud, they both knew this was only the beginning. As the sun dipped low, Natalia returned to the campfire with bundles of water-soaked herbs. She caught Kieran moving among the shadows of the tents, adjusting traps and keeping watch. He always seemed aware, always prepared, every movement deliberate. She admired his strength, his discipline, the way he seemed unyielding yet attuned to every detail. And yet, she also wondered what it would feel like to break through that exterior, to see the man beneath the scar and muscle, beneath the fear and reputation. Kieran, meanwhile, could not stop noticing her. There was a fire in her green eyes that spoke of resilience, intelligence, and untamed curiosity. She moved like the desert wind, soft, flowing, yet capable of stirring storms. Each time she glanced his way, the scarred line of his jaw seemed to tighten, and the rhythm of his heart quickened. That evening, the elders convened to discuss patrols and defenses. Natalia found herself at the edge, listening as Kieran spoke briefly but decisively, offering insight no one expected from the savage they feared. His voice carried authority, a quiet command that drew attention without raising it too loud. Natalia noticed the subtle ways he held himself, how he shifted weight on one foot, the slight flex of muscles under his shirt, the careful way he maintained distance while still asserting presence. She felt a pull, an unspoken desire to step closer, to be seen, to understand what lay beneath the scar and cold reputation. During the meeting, a younger warrior stumbled, spilling water near the fire. Kieran reacted instantly, catching the vessel before it could break. His movement was swift, precise, protective. Natalia's breath caught. She saw the strength, the control, the same ferocity that earned him fear, and yet, she sensed tenderness in the way he handled the situation, unseen by anyone else. After the elders dispersed, Natalia stayed behind, tending the fire. Kieran approached, silent and deliberate, his shadow stretching across the dirt toward her. She did not look up immediately, but she felt his presence. "You are persistent," he said finally. His voice low, not harsh, not commanding, just a statement. She tilted her head, the braid of her hair falling forward over her shoulder. I am curious," she admitted softly. He looked down at her then, the scar on his jaw illuminated by the firelight, his dark eyes piercing. "Curiosity can be dangerous," he murmured. "But perhaps it is not always a bad thing." Their hands brushed briefly again as he passed, lingering for just a heartbeat. And in that instant, Natalia felt something she could not name. Anticipation, excitement, desire, all tangled together in a slow, quiet burn that neither could resist. Night fell fully, and the camp quieted. Natalia lay in her tent replaying the day over and over. The brief touches, the shared glances, the tension of his presence, it haunted her dreams even before she drifted to sleep. Kieran, too, could not find rest. He sat outside his shelter, watching the desert stars, thinking of her, the green of her eyes, the soft curve of her braid, the strength that lay beneath her delicate features. They were both aware, in their own ways, that this was only the beginning. The slow burn had begun, a fire that would not be tamed, not by fear, not by the desert, not by anyone, and neither of them could ignore it. The wind swept across the desert plateau, carrying the faint scent of sage and sun-baked earth. Kieran moved along the ridge above the camp, his tall, muscular frame cutting a striking silhouette against the sky. His dark hair was ruffled slightly by the wind, and the scar along his jaw caught the fading light, emphasizing the hard line of his face. He observed the camp below, every motion noted, every whisper catalogued. Even as a man feared by all, he remained vigilant. Yet a part of his attention lingered elsewhere, a part he could not name or fully understand. Natalia was tending to the younger children in the camp, her mid-20s frame bending over them with gentle precision. Her curly brown hair fell in loose waves, green eyes bright despite the heat of the day, and delicate features illuminated by the sun. She smiled softly as she guided a small boy in painting patterns on a clay pot, unaware that Kieran's dark eyes were watching her from a distance, scanning every graceful movement, every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. The tension between them had grown, silent but palpable, each interaction loaded with possibility. That afternoon, Natalia walked toward the river to gather water, her basket swinging lightly at her side. Kieran followed at a distance, careful not to intrude, yet unable to resist observing her. His clean-shaven jaw tightened subtly, Scar catching the sun as he watched the sway of her braid, the gentle tilt of her head as she hummed softly while working. As she reached the riverbank, Natalia set her basket down and knelt, hands dipping into the cool water. Kieran approached, his broad shoulders moving deliberately, every muscle defined beneath his leather shirt. He offered a hand to steady her basket without speaking. Their fingers brushed, and the subtle contact sent a shock through them both. "Careful," Kieran said softly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the air. "The current can be stronger than it appears." Natalia looked up, meeting his dark gaze. She felt the heat of his presence, the weight of his stare pressing on her senses. I can handle it," she replied, voice trembling slightly, betraying a mixture of nerves and excitement. Later, the elders called a meeting, discussing patrol routes and the defense of the northern ridges. Natalia lingered at the edge, careful not to draw attention. Kieran's presence dominated the gathering, his height and muscular frame casting a shadow over those seated. He spoke little, his words sharp and precise, but they carried authority, and the camp listened, even those who feared him. Natalia felt her pulse quicken as she observed him. There was a gravity to his movements, a magnetic tension in the way he carried himself. He seemed untouchable, yet there was a subtle tenderness in his vigilance, a careful attention to the camp and its people that no one noticed but her. The first real conversation between them happened by chance. Natalia was gathering herbs near the edge of the camp when Kieran appeared behind her. The sun had begun to set, painting the desert in deep oranges and purples. "You gather well," he said, tone low, almost neutral. Natalia jumped slightly, turning to face him, green eyes wide. I try," she replied softly, brushing a strand of curly hair behind her ear. Kieran's gaze lingered on her face, Scar catching the last rays of sunlight, jaw tight, yet relaxed enough to suggest focus rather than aggression. "Your hands are careful," he observed. "Precise." Her cheeks flushed at the comment, and she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. There was an intensity in his stare that was impossible to ignore, and for a heartbeat, the world around them seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them standing at the edge of the desert. As night fell, the campfire glowed warmly, and Natalia found herself drawn to its light. Kieran approached, moving silently, the tall, muscular frame of a man accustomed to command and fear, now softened by the firelight. "You linger," he said, voice low, almost a statement of observation rather than accusation. I like the fire," she admitted, eyes flicking to the flames. "It reminds me of home, of safety." Kieran nodded slightly, Scar catching the glow. "Safety is rare," he murmured, almost to himself. "Even here." Their hands brushed again as he moved past, lingering just enough to make her pulse quicken. There was an unspoken understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the spark growing between them. And both felt it, an undeniable tension, a slow-burn fire neither wanted to name aloud yet. Over the next days, the subtle dance continued. Natalia would find herself near him, helping at the camp, carrying water or herbs, sharing brief glances that spoke more than words. Kieran's presence was constant yet unobtrusive, a looming shadow that she felt more than saw. When he spoke, it was measured, deliberate, each word carrying weight. When he moved, it was with precision, strength, and a quiet grace. And in the quiet moments, the touches, the glances, the unspoken communication, a slow understanding began to form. Natalia knew she was drawn to him, and Kieran knew he could not ignore her presence. Both were aware that what they felt was dangerous, complicated, and forbidden in its way, but the pull was inevitable. By the end of part 3, the tension had grown to a simmering fire. They had not confessed, not even to themselves fully, yet every interaction carried weight. Every touch left an echo. The desert around them, harsh and unyielding, mirrored the challenges of their hearts, unyielding, dangerous, yet beautiful and alive. The slow burn had deepened, and neither could resist it. The desert sun blazed high, beating down on the camp with relentless heat. Dust and sand clung to every exposed surface, and the wind carried the faint scent of sage and smoke from the morning fires. Kieran moved through the camp with purposeful ease, his tall, muscular frame commanding attention without effort. The scar along his left jaw caught the sun's rays, the clean-shaven face a stark contrast to the rugged strength of his body. His dark eyes scanned the camp constantly, noting the position of the younger warriors, the movements of the elders, and the quiet patterns of Natalia as she moved about her tasks. Natalia was washing herbs at a small basin near the river, her curly brown hair loose against her shoulders, green eyes bright against the reflection of water, and delicate features catching the sunlight. Her movements were deliberate, careful, each action precise, a small ritual of survival and contribution to her people. Kieran's gaze lingered on her, watching the subtle movements of her hands, the tilt of her head, the way she brushed hair away from her face. Even the smallest gestures seemed amplified when he observed them. He approached silently, stepping onto the worn stones near the riverbank. Natalia sensed him before she saw him, a shadow stretching across the sunlit water. When she looked up, she caught the full measure of his presence. Towering, muscular, scarred jaw sharp and defined, eyes dark and unreadable. "Why do you linger here alone?" he asked, voice low but carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command. I like the river," she admitted, voice quiet, almost apologetic. "It's peaceful here." Kieran studied her for a long moment. "Peace is rare," he said. "Even here." His tone was even, but there was a subtle weight to it, an unspoken understanding of the solitude that each carried in their own way. They worked together in silence for a while. Natalia tending the herbs and Kieran assisting with the heavier bundles. Their hands brushed occasionally. Intentional or accidental, it was impossible to say, and each contact sent a ripple of tension through them both. The scarred jaw, the rippling muscles, the tall frame, Kieran was an intimidating figure. Yet there was an unspoken softness in the way he moved around her, careful not to overwhelm yet impossible to ignore. Later, as the sun dipped low, Natalia found herself walking along a ridge overlooking the camp. Kieran followed at a measured distance, silent but always present. They didn't speak at first, letting the wind carry away any unnecessary words, but the quiet was filled with a weight that neither could ignore. "You watch too much," Natalia said finally, a playful lilt to her voice despite the tension between them. Kieran turned his dark eyes on her, the scar along his jaw illuminated by the setting sun. "I observe," he corrected. "Observation keeps you alive." She smiled faintly, knowing he was both serious and teasing, a rare combination in a man so feared. The tension between them crackled, unspoken and palpable. For the first time, Natalia wondered if Kieran's fearsome reputation was just a mask, a shield against something he had long protected within himself. Night fell, the desert air cooling as the camp settled around the fire. Natalia sat close, but not too close, the glow of the flames illuminating her delicate features. Kieran joined her quietly, settling on a nearby log. He didn't speak at first, letting the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the desert carry the conversation. "You are different," he said finally, his voice low, measured. "I've seen many people. Few notice the small things." "I notice," Natalia replied softly, meeting his dark gaze. "I notice everything. The small things matter." Kieran's scarred jaw softened subtly, though his eyes remained sharp. "Most people don't care enough to see," he said. "Curiosity can be dangerous, but perhaps it is necessary." Their hands brushed again as he adjusted a log near the fire, lingering for a fraction longer than necessary. Natalia felt her chest tighten, heart racing in response to the simple contact. Kieran felt the same, a pull toward her that was both confusing and magnetic, undeniable yet unspoken. As the night deepened, the camp quieted further. Natalia remained near the fire, thinking of him, wondering what it would be like to step closer, to break through the wall of fear and reputation that surrounded him. Kieran, sitting nearby, allowed himself to imagine the same. imagining her green eyes, her gentle hands, the curve of her lips when she smiled faintly. The slow burn between them deepened, stretching across the quiet hours of the desert night. Unspoken but undeniable. They were aware that trust, closeness, and desire would take time. Days, weeks, perhaps months, but both felt the inevitability of it. And in the desert, under the stars, the fire between them began to glow stronger, a slow-burning flame that neither could ignore. The morning sun rose harsh and pale over the desert, casting long shadows across the camp. Kieran moved among the tents, the leather of his clothing creaking slightly as he walked. Every muscle in his tall, broad frame was visible in the morning light, and the scar along his jaw caught the first rays, emphasizing the chiseled strength of his face. His eyes, dark and unwavering, scanned the camp with the precision of a man who had survived too many battles to ever be careless. Natalia emerged from her small shelter, her mid-20s frame lithe and graceful, curly brown hair tied loosely to keep it from falling over her face, green eyes alert and observant. She carried a bundle of herbs in one hand, stepping lightly over stones and dust. Kieran noticed her immediately, the sway of her hips, the precise movements of her hands, the way her gaze swept across the camp. His heart skipped, a subtle, quiet reaction he refused to acknowledge, but it was there, undeniable. The day began with mundane tasks, but tension hung thick in the air. Natalia went to gather water, and Kieran followed silently at a distance, muscles tensed, alert. Every glance between them carried weight. Their hands brushed several times as they worked side by side, and each contact ignited something neither could ignore. "Your hands are still careful," Kieran said softly as she sorted herbs, scar-catching sunlight. "You have a rhythm to your work." Natalia's cheeks warmed at the praise. I learned from the land," she said quietly. "It teaches you if you listen." He nodded slightly, dark eyes lingering on her face. "Few listen. Most only hear." The small moment passed, but its weight remained, a silent acknowledgement that they both noticed the pull growing between them. Later, a commotion erupted near the edge of the camp. A young warrior had stumbled, injuring his leg. Kieran was there in an instant, tall frame bending over the injured boy, hands strong yet careful as he assessed the damage. Natalia rushed to assist, her green eyes wide with concern. Their hands met over the boy's leg as they worked to stabilize it. Neither pulled away, each aware of the warmth, the connection, the silent electricity of touch. Kieran's scarred jaw tightened slightly, and Natalia's chest fluttered in a way she couldn't control. Once the boy was tended, Kieran stood, brushing dust from his leather clothing. "You care too much," he said, dark eyes on her, voice low. "I can't help it," she replied honestly. "It's who I am." For the first time, Kieran allowed himself a small, rare smile, subtle but genuine. It reached his eyes briefly, softening the scarred, fearsome exterior that everyone else feared. Natalia caught it, her heart fluttering at the sight. As the sun began to sink, casting long shadows over the desert, Natalia and Kieran walked along a ridge overlooking the camp. The heat of the day lingered, but the wind was cooler, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth. They walked side by side, neither speaking immediately, both lost in thought. "You trust easily," Kieran said finally, dark eyes on her profile. "Or perhaps, you have no choice but to trust." Natalia paused, considering the words. "Trust is complicated," she said softly, "but I feel I can trust you." The statement hung in the air, heavy and charged. Kieran's scarred jaw shifted slightly, and for a moment, the fearsome, untouchable man everyone whispered about seemed almost human. He looked away, toward the desert horizon, taking in the emptiness that mirrored the void in his own heart, slowly filling with the presence of this woman who challenged him without even trying. Night fell, and the desert became a canvas of stars above. Natalia sat near the fire, her hands resting lightly on her lap, green eyes reflecting the flames. Kieran joined her quietly, settling on a log a few feet away. The quiet was comfortable yet tense, each aware of the other's presence in a way that was both thrilling and dangerous. "You think too much," Natalia said, voice soft, teasing. "And you speak too freely," Kieran countered, dark eyes on her, scar catching firelight. She smiled faintly, chest fluttering. "Maybe that's why we understand each other," she said. He didn't respond immediately, merely letting the words settle between them. Their hands brushed again as he adjusted the log he was sitting on, lingering just long enough to make her pulse quicken. In the silence, a slow-burning flame grew, stronger now, more undeniable. Later, Natalia returned to her shelter. She could still feel the ghost of his touch on her hands, the warmth of his presence lingering in her thoughts. Kieran stood outside his own shelter, tall and vigilant, eyes scanning the horizon. He thought of her, green eyes, curly brown hair, delicate hands, and the way she looked at him with cautious curiosity. He was a man of few words, of fearsome reputation, yet in the quiet of the desert night, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to reach out, to let her in completely. The slow burn had grown into a steady fire now, neither of them able to ignore its pull. The desert around them, harsh and unforgiving, mirrored the slow, dangerous, and undeniable growth of something neither had fully named, but both felt in every glance, every brush of hands, every shared silence. The desert night was alive with silence. Only the faint rustle of wind against the dunes and the distant cry of a hawk broke the stillness. Kieran walked along the edge of the camp, his tall, muscular frame casting a long shadow in the moonlight. The scar along his jaw was visible even in the soft light, a reminder to all who saw him of battles survived and fear earned. His eyes, dark and calculating, scanned the horizon, but every now and then, his gaze flicked back to the small glow of the fire where Natalia sat. Her green eyes reflecting the flames, she had not expected him to be there, and yet she felt a quiet sense of comfort in his presence. The tension between them, slow burning for days, had evolved into something more tangible. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was anticipation, a silent yearning that neither dared speak aloud. Natalia stood to stretch, her mid-20s frame graceful and youthful, the braid of her brown curls swinging over her shoulder. Her delicate features were softened by the firelight, yet her green eyes held a depth that Kieran found impossible to ignore. He approached, silent as a shadow, careful not to startle her, every step measured. "You do not rest," Natalia said softly. Noticing him for the first time, Kieran's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Rest comes later," he replied. "The desert does not forgive negligence." Her gaze lingered on him, taking in the broad shoulders, the defined muscles under his leather tunic, the scarred jawline illuminated by firelight. "You carry the weight of the world," she observed. "Or perhaps, just the weight of fear." Kieran's eyes darkened slightly, and for a fleeting moment, the fearsome reputation that preceded him seemed to soften. "Fear keeps people alive," he said quietly, "but it also keeps them from living." They fell into a quiet rhythm, walking along the edge of the desert camp. The moonlight illuminated the sand, creating shifting patterns across the dunes. Kieran's tall form moved with deliberate precision beside Natalia, whose eyes flicked to him repeatedly despite her efforts to remain composed. Each brush of their hands, each shared glance, sent ripples of tension through them both. "You notice everything," Natalia said after a long pause. "And you trust too easily," he countered. His tone was even, but the subtle weight of curiosity and caution underlined every word. "Maybe I trust because I have no choice," she replied softly, green eyes meeting his dark ones. I feel I can trust you." Kieran's jaw tightened slightly, scar catching the moonlight. For a brief instant, he allowed himself to imagine a life in which her words were more than just trust. They were permission, an opening he had never allowed anyone to give him. Later, they found themselves alone near a small rock outcropping. Natalia knelt to examine some desert plants, while Kieran stood behind her, tall and vigilant. The air between them was charged, electric, a quiet tension that neither could break. "You ask too many questions," Kieran murmured. Tone low, a growl under the calmness. "And you answer too little," Natalia replied, a soft smirk tugging at her lips. He took a step closer, scarred jaw illuminated by the moonlight, muscles flexing as he moved with careful grace. "Perhaps that is why we are alike," he said quietly. Their hands brushed as he reached down to steady a falling plant, lingering longer than necessary. Natalia's pulse quickened, chest tightening with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Kieran felt the heat of her presence, the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat matching his own. The desert night, vast and empty, seemed to fold around them, leaving only the two of them and the slow-burning tension that had become impossible to ignore. By the fire, they finally allowed themselves a shared moment of quiet. Natalia sat cross-legged, green eyes reflecting the flames, hands resting lightly on her knees. Kieran remained standing at first, watching her, then slowly lowered himself to sit nearby. His muscular frame radiated strength, yet the way he positioned himself beside her was careful, deliberate, protective. "You are different from anyone I have ever known," he said softly, voice low and almost intimate. Natalia tilted her head, curly brown hair falling forward slightly. "And you are—" She hesitated, searching for the right word, both terrifying and comforting at once. A rare laugh, soft and unguarded, escaped him. "Terrifying to most, yes," Kieran admitted, "but perhaps not to you." Their hands met again, this time intentionally, fingers intertwining briefly. The desert stars above seemed to shimmer in acknowledgement, the quiet night surrounding them with intimacy and possibility. The slow burn had deepened into something more urgent, more undeniable. Every glance, every touch, every unspoken word carried weight. They both knew the dangers, his reputation, the elders' scrutiny, the harshness of the desert, but neither could resist the pull toward one another. As the night stretched on, the desert seemed to hold its breath around them, a silent witness to a bond growing stronger, a fire igniting quietly but with inevitable intensity. Kieran and Natalia were no longer just observer and observed. Protector and cared for, they were companions, tentative and cautious, yet drawn together by a force neither could name, yet both could feel in every glance, every brush of hands, every shared silence. The desert was restless. Winds swept across the dunes, carrying fine particles of sand that stung exposed skin, whispering through the sparse vegetation with an eerie urgency. Kieran stood at the edge of the camp, tall and imposing, muscles flexing beneath his leather tunic. The scar along his jaw caught the shifting light, giving his face an almost sculpted, unforgiving appearance. His dark eyes scanned the horizon, alert. But a part of his mind was elsewhere, on Natalia, who moved through the camp with her usual grace, her green eyes alert, brown curls bouncing lightly with each step. She carried herself like someone unaware of the weight she had on him, yet Kieran felt it with every glance she spared him. The elders had summoned him earlier that day. There was a patrol scheduled for the northern ridge, and Kieran had been assigned to lead it. The whispers that followed him everywhere, about his scar, his temper, his fearsome presence, made him bristle even now. Yet his mind was only partially on the task. Every thought of discipline, of battle readiness, was filtered through the awareness of Natalia's nearness, her presence both intoxicating and grounding. As he prepared his gear, she approached, hands empty but eyes searching his face. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, her voice soft yet filled with concern. Kieran turned slowly, dark eyes meeting hers. "As ready as I ever am," he said, tone even but low, resonant. The briefest hint of a smile touched his lips, a rare softness reserved only for her. Natalia hesitated, glancing away for a heartbeat, then back. "Kieran, be careful," she whispered. The simple plea struck him deeper than he would admit. He reached out, brushing her arm lightly, fingers lingering in a deliberate, protective gesture. Her pulse seemed to press against his own, subtle and insistent. "Always," he murmured. The patrol was tense, the northern ridge shadowed by rock formations and shifting sands. Kieran led the small group, every movement calculated, every glance alert. Natalia had insisted on accompanying him, arguing that she could help with medicinal herbs if any were injured. Reluctantly, he allowed it. Though he remained watchful, muscles coiled, scarred jaw set in focus. The desert stretched around them like an endless ocean of sand, and the wind carried a low hum that made every sound, every footstep, every whisper of clothing, seem magnified. Natalia stayed close, her green eyes scanning the surroundings with sharp focus, her delicate hands occasionally brushing against his as they moved together. The slow burn between them simmered under the harsh sun, unspoken but ever present, igniting in subtle glances and the briefest touches. An ambush came suddenly. Shadows shifted too quickly, a rustle of movement, and then the clash of bodies. Kieran reacted instantly, muscles taut, moving with precision and power. The scar along his jaw caught sunlight as he ducked, blocked, and struck. Natalia stayed close, moving with agility, eyes sharp, hands ready to assist with herbs or bandages if needed. In the chaos, a hand brushed against Kieran's side, unintentional yet grounding. He felt the shock of contact, a jolt of something stronger than adrenaline, something tied to her, only her, and the possibility of what lay unspoken between them. For a heartbeat, he allowed himself to acknowledge it before the battle consumed him again. The skirmish ended quickly, thanks largely to Kieran's commanding presence and skill. The ambushers fled, leaving only the echo of dust and wind. Natalia exhaled, her chest heaving slightly, and Kieran turned to her, scarred jaw tense, eyes dark but relieved. "You are reckless," he said softly, though his tone carried admiration beneath the warning. "And you are protective," she replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Night fell, and the camp settled, exhausted but alive. The firelight flickered against the shadows, casting dramatic shapes across the tents and dunes. Kieran sat near the fire, tall frame relaxed only slightly, Scar catching the flames as he regarded Natalia. She approached, green eyes bright, brown curls tumbling over her shoulders, hands empty but confident. "You were amazing today," she said softly, voice carrying admiration and warmth. Kieran's eyes softened in the firelight. "I do what must be done," he replied, tone even. "But today, I noticed you more than I should have." Her gaze met his, heart pounding, green eyes wide but steady. "You have always noticed me," she said, a quiet honesty that made the desert night seem impossibly still. He leaned closer, the slow burn finally igniting into a tangible heat. "Natalia, I cannot deny it any longer," Kieran said, voice low but intense. His scarred jaw, his defined muscles, and towering frame contrasted with the softness in his eyes as he reached for her hand deliberately. Her fingers intertwined with his, small, delicate, yet confident. "Kieran, I feel the same," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. The connection was electric, undeniable. The desert night a silent witness to the culmination of weeks of tension, longing, and subtle interactions. They didn't rush. The desert demanded patience, and so did their hearts. They sat together, hands intertwined, words unnecessary, tension and desire balanced in quiet understanding. The slow burn had reached its apex, not with fiery declarations, but with a mutual, unspoken acknowledgement of what they had grown to mean to each other. The desert stretched infinitely around them, wind whispering over sand and stone. Kieran's scar caught the flickering firelight as he gazed at Natalia, tall frame protective yet vulnerable in the quiet. Natalia's green eyes reflected both trust and unspoken love. The world around them, harsh and unyielding, mirrored the path they had walked together, dangerous, slow, and unrelenting, but now, with the promise of connection, understanding, and something neither had fully dared to name before. For the first time in both their lives, they allowed themselves to simply be, their presence together an unspoken vow, their hearts finally acknowledging the inevitability of what had grown between them, love forged slowly, fiercely, and undeniably.